Hello, Neurodivergent Nation. This is Dr. Service, and we're talking about self-diagnosis. What do you go with, self-diagnosis or professional diagnosis, or both? Can you be taken seriously with self-diagnosis? A self-diagnosis is all from you, and it's not a bad thing if it's done well. It's okay to self-diagnose in many cases, because we do it all the time with like the flu, or a cold, or cardiac arrest. You don't need a professional license to self-diagnose because it can often be a very helpful step if you decide to get a professional diagnosis. Arriving at a self-diagnosis means you've studied it well, you've looked at all the diagnostic criteria, and you've been able to identify enough of the signs in yourself that you can check off all the little boxes needed to come to a provisional conclusion. Provisional means that this is the best option for you for a diagnosis, given the fact that you've not had a professional assessment done. Now with autism, you've probably looked it up online, you've watched videos of others who've been professionally diagnosed. You may have joined social media groups about it and talked to people who know things. If you want another page to visit for more information on autism, by the way, visit mine at neurodivergentdoctor.com and subscribe to this station and check out my Instagram and TikTok as well. I'll keep information coming to you on these subjects. But by doing the research, both clinical and anecdotal, you'll not only know what autism is, but you also kind of discover what it isn't. You've kind of learned what it looks like in different people and in yourself. And you've been able to figure out that autism and ADHD share a lot of common signs and they can be hard to tease apart. But to the best of your knowledge and to the best of your abilities, you've done the research to have a pretty good idea that you very well may be autistic. After you've arrived at the idea that you may be autistic, this is where the magic happens. You might start noticing more and more things about yourself that confirms autism in you. So many people that I speak with, they say that arriving at a provisional self-diagnosis allowed them for the first time in their lives to act a little more like who they truly are. People carefully are starting to accept the idea and look at themselves through that lens. It's like they're doing that whole toe dip method where you stick your toe in the water first to see how the water feels, to see how an autism diagnosis might feel. And many people are easing into an autistic identification, and they're finding that they feel good, they feel afraid sometimes, and at the same time they feel exhilarated, and they feel validated, and all kinds of other emotions and feelings that come along with that discovery. So if you're on the road to a self-diagnosis, here's a big question to ask yourself. Are you willing to accept that once you learn all about it, that you might not be autistic, or that you might be autistic? Are you hoping for one answer over another? An honest self-diagnosis process means you want to know the truth, and you're not interested in conforming to the signs that aren't really you, whether they're conscious or unconscious. You're not trying to fit yourself into the diagnosis, but rather you're allowing yourself to honestly see if the diagnosis fits you. There is this phenomenon and it's called confirmation bias. And sometimes without even knowing it, we look for reasons to back up certain ideas about ourselves that we already have. We look harder for signs and bend certain pieces of information in our minds to fit what we want it to, sometimes ignoring or justifying information that goes for or against an idea to better fit our desired outcome. That's confirmation bias. So watch out for that and be upfront with yourself about this whole process. The next point I want to make is that sometimes professionals are not always right. Sometimes they can only use the information that they're given and can only use information they're able to understand. Sometimes they don't get enough information, or they get the wrong information, or they have their own biases, or they misinterpret the data, or they're using outdated research. Sometimes people don't even realize that they do something which is autistic in nature, so they will tell the person doing the assessment that they don't do those things, when in actuality they do. So, sometimes professionals aren't always correct. I'm going to go out on a limb here, and this is based on what I've had people tell me, but some people have to go with their own self-diagnosis when they know that the opinion of the professional is not truly accurate. One woman self-diagnosed and then went in for a professional diagnosis, and he didn't diagnose her with autism because she enjoyed acting, and he believed that autistic individuals were unable to act. Also consider the idea that many autistic individuals find it very difficult to communicate as effectively as they want, and things can be missed if the right questions aren't asked by a professional. But when it's you who's doing the self-assessment, you don't have to struggle with communicating how you are. And the self-diagnostic process can take place over a long period of time, which gives you time to really identify and reflect on the autistic traits that you're experiencing. Sometimes the autistic assessment It's very short, over just a few hours. Sometimes it's hard to get all the information in that time frame. I also want to point out the difference between a self-diagnosis and a self-declaration. A self-declaration is when someone sees traits in themselves but hasn't really done the adequate research. They haven't put much effort into it. But they declare that they're autistic because they see similarities between themselves and someone else who is autistic. It doesn't mean they're not autistic, but it also is not a self-diagnosis. Like, OMG, you don't like people either and you're autistic? So I guess that means I'm autistic too. So when people do self-declare, it is okay to gently educate them about self-diagnosis and encourage them to do more research on the subject. Right now, there is an autism diagnosis floodgate that is bursting. I believe hundreds of thousands of people are at some stage of self-discovery of their autism right now, and we have to be careful not to be the autism police, determining who can and cannot call themselves autistic. That's not our place to do that. We can't dictate what words people use to describe themselves. And if you just know that you're autistic, remember when you first started to recognize signs of autism in yourself? Remember how it was almost unbelievable. But the signs were there, hidden as they tried to be. Remember the process you went through, the answering of so many questions from your history by looking at it through that lens, wondering if you're faking it, wondering if there's something else that could be going on that accounts for your behavior. So let's allow people to go through their process in their own way. And let's work together to make our neurodivergent nation a welcoming place for them and everybody who's neurodivergent to explore. Reasons why someone might self-diagnose. Number one, professionals who can diagnose autism are very rare. There are relatively very few of them. Number two, of those professionals we do have, how many actually know autism well enough to catch the cases that look like something else, like bipolar or borderline personality disorder or OCD or ADHD, or whatever else people might get misdiagnosed with, or co-occurring disorders? How many of them have enough experience with the infinite multidimensional spectrum called autism to be really able to spot those who unconsciously mask really well? You wouldn't believe how many stories I've heard from people who were not diagnosed with autism the first time they inquired about it because a professional said, well, you have friends, so you can't be autistic. Or, you can't be autistic because you look people in the eye, like you're looking at me right now in the eye. Or, you can't be autistic because you don't walk on your tiptoes. Autistic people walk on their tiptoes. So, no autism for you. Number three, people in power sometimes really suck. I believe governing bodies throughout the world are so very behind on autism, so don't count on them to help you. In fact, sometimes people in positions of power and authority can even hinder the process of diagnosis and advocacy because of their support and attention to certain organizations that most autistic people believe do not help. We need more clinicians who can be trained in autism, and for many incoming clinicians who really want to help the autistic community, the licensing board in the various states can also be a barrier because they all vary on what they require. Some require a gazillion hours of extra time doing therapy, and others don't require much at all. Like, why can't there be a uniform requirement instead of, like, to be a therapist, you must answer these questions 3 and resolve to solve the riddle that resides at the top of Mount Who Gives a Crap. Because of this, it's going to be a long time before we have enough clinicians trained to actually diagnose autism to meet the demand of people wanting tested. Furthermore, insurance companies sometimes pay doctors so little that many doctors won't even accept insurances, especially the Medicaid side of things. Speaking of money, that leads us to number 4, reasons people self-diagnose. It can also cost a ton of money. Number 4 is about money. I've heard assessments running in the $5,000 range, and some can be low, like $1,500. It depends on who's doing it. So money is a factor. Luckily, insurance will usually cover testing, but like I said, getting clinicians to take your insurance is tough to find because of low reimbursement rates, and the clinicians who do accept insurance often have a waiting list, months or even years long. The clinicians who don't take insurance usually require payment at the time of service, so cost is a factor for a lot of people, and I don't blame you. So what can we do? We can only assume that autism testing is an exclusive service reserved mostly for those of higher socioeconomic status. That's terrible, but that's sure the way it looks. Number 5, autistic people have been so poorly represented by organizations that are gaining huge profits, but are arguably doing nothing to help. In fact, many believe that these massive bloated organizations often hurt autistic individuals by putting out misinformation and getting laws passed that go against them. So, a self-diagnosis can be a way of giving the middle finger to those organizations and the governments that cater to them. Follow the money. Look up compensation for the executives of the big autism nonprofit. There's a lot of profit in there, for real. All right, number 6. We all know that autistic people have different types of brains, and sometimes they're more astute than the neurotypical brain, even the neurotypical person if they're a professional. Because information is so easily accessible now, autistic people can sometimes know more about their autism and potential diagnoses than the professionals themselves. I learn a lot about autism from different autistic people. I love to be educated by autistic individuals because the experiences differ so much from one to another and even from my own experience. Number 7. Depending on where you go for an assessment, some have reported the testing process to be highly stressful and nearly traumatizing. At our clinic, we're not like that. We're relaxed, and you can see how we do autism assessments to help ease the anxiety and the fear by checking out my YouTube video on the assessment process. I walk you through what it's like. So stress can be another reason that people self-diagnose. Some people are 100% sure that they're autistic, and they may not trust the system or the clinician, so they're like, yeah, I'm good. I'm autistic and I don't need the test to prove it. Number 8, some tests aren't great for adults who are out there functioning very well in society. Some tests are considered by many to be biased toward young white boys, or they only pick up on the more severe presentations of autism. So, historically, women have often gone and still go undiagnosed oftentimes, and people who are black or indigenous or people of color or those of the LGBTQ community, my goodness, they're often overlooked as well. And to make matters worse, they're more likely to be misdiagnosed with other disorders, which leads to a whole other set of problems. So testing definitely has its limitations. Number 9, self-diagnosis can also be a welcome part of the process toward a professional diagnosis. Sometimes you can self-diagnose, make some positive changes in your life that you need, allow yourself to honor your autism, and then later, once you finally come across someone who you can feel trustworthy to diagnose you professionally, you may want to take that option. So for many people, self-diagnosis is a step forward in the process of getting themselves a professional diagnosis. Number 10, here we have the problem of discrimination. Some people don't want a professional diagnosis because it could cause discrimination problems for them in their lives. One man told me he fears he'll lose custody of his kids if given a professional diagnosis because he heard that can happen. Another woman in the military said she would most definitely get treated worse if she were diagnosed professionally. So she's not going to go get a professional diagnosis. A psychiatrist once told me to my face that I should think twice before seeking a professional testing because it would change the way people see me professionally. Now, let me ask you a question. If I were seeking a job and that psychiatrist who told me that were the person making the hiring decisions, don't you think that would negatively affect my chances of getting that job? I believe it would. Luckily, I'm self-employed, so I don't have to worry about that. Unfortunately, discrimination is a real factor for many people, and they have to take that into consideration because most people don't really know what autism is, and they see it as something that it is not. Number 11, and lastly, usually people don't need a professional diagnosis to be accepted and welcomed into the neurodivergent community. They can get the support and the understanding they've been needing without a professional diagnosis. So they can self-diagnose and be welcomed with open arms into the autistic community. So now I'd like to go over 4 reasons why a professional diagnosis for autism may be a good idea. Number 1, if you need accommodations and support that agencies can offer, or if you want to apply for scholarships or any number of things that might help you, having a professional diagnosis can open the door to that. Number 2, it's helped people to feel even more validated after a self-diagnosis. And if you have not self-diagnosed, it can really help explain a lot of things from your history and how you are now. And it's very validating as well. You can usually be pretty confident in a diagnosis usually. But for those who have already self-diagnosed, it helps to take away that element of self-doubt that people can have with a self-diagnosis. When we test for autism, we don't really rely on one test for it. We have lots of tests, and they all work together to validate and tell a more complete story to lend credence to each other or challenge each other. The data is the data, and when professional diagnosis is reached, it can be a majorly positive thing for a person in their mind, and it can change their lives. It's not from their mother or their partner. It's data driven. So many people who are self-diagnosed experience imposter syndrome, worrying that they're just making it all up until they do something autistic again and they're like, oh yeah, I'm totally autistic. But a professional diagnosis can really help to confirm things. Number 3, some assessments will also help identify where your strengths and your limitations are in certain areas of your life, including cognitive functioning and personality. Some people have strong verbal skills. Some have a strong working memory, but may have limitations with processing speed. Knowing where you are in these domains can provide you with areas in which you can focus your growth in the future and highlight areas in which you excel. Number 4, and lastly, it can really help the clinician to gain even more experience. It's a little bit selfish on our part, but as a clinician, I can say that we were all new once, and we do the best we can. But more and more people are seeking professional diagnosis, and that means we see more and more different presentations of autism. Many of us clinicians get together and we tell each other about the new features and the signs that we can attribute to autism, which in turn helps the people seeking professional diagnosis in the future. So, by getting a professional diagnosis, it helps other people in the future with their diagnosis by lending information to the scientific community. Help me help you, which will help me help others. So that's a good reason to get a professional diagnosis as well. Where do you stand? Are you going to lean toward self-diagnosis for now? If so, I'd like to offer some hopefully helpful ideas on taking some better informed steps to self-diagnosis. Number 1, the first step is to be open to the idea that you might be autistic. I mean, you are at that point right now where you're starting to wonder because you've been seeing signs in yourself that point in that direction. You might be afraid of what that might mean, so take a deep breath and familiarize yourself with the information that's positive and avoid the fearmongers out there who are trying to cure autism or think that a change in diet will fix it or that vaccinations caused it. Don't pay attention to that information. Don't let the haters talk you into having an anti-autism bias. Autism in and of itself is not bad. Our world totally doesn't support autistic individuals very well, but autism is not bad. It's simply a difference. And I've heard people compare autism and non-autism to a computer running on Linux versus computer running on Windows, or one is Apple and the other is Android. Autism is a difference and not a deficiency. I think a lot of times people also confuse autism with co-occurring disorders such as anxiety or OCD or some of those other disorders. So seek out information from actual autistic people. They're usually a better source. Number 2, speaking of source, do a lot of research and check your sources. Stay away from hate groups or people who make obviously false statements, and join some online communities that are actually autistic. Try to avoid a lot of the parents of autism groups. You might want to stay away from all those groups online because a lot of autistic people believe that the parents are part of the problem. I'm just saying, don't hate me on it. So go to the groups with autistic people providing information. They can be autism experts. In fact, you'll probably see me in some of those groups as well. Number 3, start making a list of things that you think might be attributes of autism in you. I have something I can email you. Well, actually, I think I'll just put it on my website. It's something that you can use. It's a list, and it'll categorize some of your autistic features more effectively. This will help you when you compare it to the diagnostic criteria in the DSM-5 for autism spectrum disorder. So go to my website, neurodivergentdoctor.com, for that list. Number 4, ask your parents or someone who's helped raise you about your history with various autism-related behaviors. I found that a lot of autistic individuals don't recognize their own autistic traits at first. Their traits are just normal to them because they've done them their whole lives. So when I ask someone if they had any problems with friendships when they were younger, they sometimes answer that they had many great friends, but the parents are often on the side disagreeing with their answer. So just be aware of that. Ask someone about the specific traits and the behaviors who had a hand in raising you as a kid, because that's where you're probably going to get most of your historical data for it. Number 5, there are some online screening questionnaires that can help you see what degree of autistic type traits you might have. One is called the Autism Spectrum Quotient, and it's available free online, and I'll put that link in my webpage for you. However, none of these online tests and questionnaires are comprehensive, and they should never be used as a standalone tool for diagnosis. They're just screening tools, but they can help clarify and help organize your traits in your mind, and they can be interesting. So I'll put a link to that in the description below and on my website, neurodivergentdoctor.com. Really, at this time, there are no conclusive 100% surefire ways to detect autism. There are no effective genetic or blood tests or scans, and our current testing is doing the best it can, and I really think they're pretty effective, but I don't know that there will ever be a completely accurate testing process, and sometimes self-diagnosis is the best a person can do in some situations. What I do know is that there has to be an entirely new process to testing in the future, and we need improved diagnostic criteria created that reflects this infinite, multidimensional autistic spectrum that's now becoming more and more apparent. There is such a wide spectrum of neurodiverse features that are being discovered. It's absolutely incredible. Because there aren't enough clinicians to take on the influx of those recognizing that they're autistic, let's be encouraging to those who are taking the time to do what they need to do to self-diagnose, because it really can change their lives for better. Sometimes it's scary, sometimes it's exhilarating, but it's my hope that every autistic individual will soon get the gift of being able to understand and honor their own autism. I really hope everyone who self-diagnoses can follow up with a professional diagnosis as well. Either way, we all deserve to be supported, and we all deserve empathy as well as acceptance in this neurotypical world. Every autistic person should have the chance to feel the warmth of self-acceptance and self-compassion, self-respect, and sometimes a self-diagnosis can be a crucial part of their process of self-discovery. Lastly, we have to ask ourselves, what's the real purpose of any diagnosis? It's to help somebody better understand who they are, what they're experiencing, and to better help them know how to move forward in a healthier, happier way. And that's just beautiful. And everybody should be able to have that. I'm Dr. Service, and I hope this helps you in your neurodiverse universe.